Comic Geek Speak presents Back to the Bins, episode 578. Hey there, guys, it's Ian, and welcome one and all to the show. This is a syndicated episode of Comic Geek Speak, featuring Paul Spataro, longtime friend of the show, and he was a guest on a recent comic talk that we had a couple of months back. And he's going to be joined by Chris and Shane on this episode for the usual format of his show as they review 3 books. I believe it's going to be 1 independent, 1 Marvel, and 1 DC. I believe what those books are going to be, for your listening pleasure, a secret until you listen to said episode. So stay tuned and you'll find out more. Just a quick note that the episode itself has a bit of a issue with its sound for the first 25 minutes or so. You're only really going to notice it when Paul is speaking, but they do resolve it after that, and that's about the length of the first review. So if you are having issues hearing and you'd rather just skip forward, it does correct itself about 25 minutes into the episode for the second review of the show. So do keep that in mind. It is easy to hear both Shane and Chris on the call, and you can hear what Paul is saying. I just want to be, entirely transparent with you before listening to the episode. If you hear a little bit of an audio issue for the first 25 minutes or so, it does get resolved after that. And hopefully both me and Murd, and maybe even Chris and Shane, if we can work it out, will be on a future episode of Back to the Bins in the next month or two once we get our schedules sorted out. Speaking of schedules, this is the time of year where most CGS brethren are scattered to the winds, as it were. So that's why we haven't had a new episode in a little bit. We will be releasing a Crisis tapes that Murd and Peter recorded about a week or two ago, sometime in the not-too-distant future, whether it be later this week as you're listening to this or early next week. And if you're listening to this 2 years later, then that officially makes absolutely no difference. But that episode will be out shortly, as I believe Peter and Murd cover the first couple of episodes of CW's Crisis on Infinite Earths as a little bit of a meandering from the Crisis issues themselves, and they'll be back on track with that once they finish out with the CW Crisis on Infinite Earths. So you have that to look forward to, and then we'll be recording either a comic talk or previews as our next full CGS episode in the not-too-distant future, depending on schedules and whatnot, but that's what you have to look forward to in the not-too-distant future in general. And speaking of you, the listeners, we thank you so much for your continued support of the show any way you give it at patreon.com/comicgeekspeak for keeping the lights on both digitally and in person. For those of you who have heard in recent episodes, there was a little bit of a water snafu at the studio, so we are going to have to be moving things around and probably replacing a few things. The equipment itself is actually pretty old, so in general we're going to be hopefully upgrading things over the next couple of months so that we can have in-studio recordings and have them be as high quality as we can possibly give them to you. You'll even notice that the layout of the studio will probably change a little bit as we're thinking of moving where the table is a little bit so we can get a better angle and hopefully see everybody and not be as cramped as we are when we do fit ourselves in there. But yes, you folks at patreon.com/comicgeekspeak make all of that possible. For as little as $1 a month, you can support the show, and we really do greatly appreciate it. And for those of you who have sent regular donations over at comicgeekspeak.com/donate.php over the years, you are just as important, and thank you so much for that. And if you can't support the show monetarily, you can certainly support the show by letting a friend, family, or otherwise know about the show. And any way that you spread the word about the show keeps us running, and we really do greatly appreciate that. Once again, patreon.com/comicgeekspeak. All right, this is the last you'll hear me on this episode as I hand things over officially now to Paul Spataro, and back to the bins. Enjoy.
Back to the bin. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Bins. I'm Paul Spataro, and I am once again joined by some of my friends from CGS. Something we always talk about doing. We say, "Oh, we're going to do this at least every 6 months." We never get it done again in less than a year. It never happens. We have Chris Everly with us. Chris, this has got to be like the fifth or sixth time on the show, right?
I'd say so, Paul, and I'm, as always, happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
I'm always happy to have you on, but this is the very first time that I'm managing to get Shane Mulholland on with us.
Yay!
And thanks for coming on, Shane.
Oh,
It
thanks
isn't
for
our
inviting
first time recording together because I did manage to squeeze in a visit at CBS a couple of months ago. So it's cool to either return the favor or have you return the favor or whatever it may be. I don't even
Sure.
But thanks for coming on. I was looking forward to having you guys. We're going to split this up in two, though, because Ian Levinstein and Adam Murdo were supposed to come on as well, but schedules just did not line up. So rather than just keep putting it off, we decided, we'll split it into two shows. And, like I had said then, when we do that, if you guys are available, you're more than happy to join it. It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. But that said, Chris and I were talking before we started to record about that I've been going a little nuts lately, and I've been spending a lot more money on old comics than I used to or that I should. But thankfully, my wife is an enabler, as I've said many times on the show, and she doesn't get mad at me when I come home and say, "Yeah, I spent a couple $100."
Yeah.
So anyway, I've been going crazy buying. The biggest thing that I've been getting, or the thing I'm happiest at, Chris, I've gotten I think 4 or 5 issues of Amazing Spider-Man below issue 40 for less than $40 each.
Wow.
So it's been a long time since I was able to fill one of those holes in that collection.
Yeah.
I was telling Chris, I only go up to issue 300 is my top number. I don't go beyond that because I have to limit myself somewhere. And I have a solid run from issue 48 up. But below that, I probably have about 15 of the 47 issues. So it gives me a lot that I need. And just to be filling in 4 or 5 spots, really,
that's amazing.
Makes me happy.
Well, Paul, if you accept really low grade, you'll be able to get most of those issues.
Now, I was at a show a couple of months ago. They're having a show once a month over in Melville, New York, which is only 10 minutes from my house. And it's purely a comic show. There's no entertainment stuff. It's just back issues, no creators. And I found a dealer who had a decent amount of older stuff, and most of the things were in a box for $20 a book. And it was quality stuff. But then when you went further, they had a divider that said $100 past this divider. And I was looking through there, and it's harder for me to justify paying $100 a book. But I saw a copy of Spider-Man, let's say 15, the first Mysterio.
Nice.
And I pulled that out. So $100 I'm buying it. And it was in nice shape. And I handed it to him, and he was like, this wasn't over here. He thought it was $20. He said, oh, no, it's over here. And he says, okay. Let's look at it. He says, it's $500. And I said, I thought it was $100. He says, no. He says, from here to here was $100. Everything beyond that is we tell you the price when you pull it out.
Did he have a sign? I have to speak as an old retailer now. Did he have a sign indicating that?
He had a divider, but the divider was not clear as to what it said.
Yeah, that's crappy retailing.
Yeah.
So I kind of give him the credit for actually having it separated from the $100 books, but not having it marked as to what it is. I just thought everything past that $100 mark was
sure.
I'm gonna say this is just both as a customer and then all the years I was selling books. Anyone who doesn't have price tags in their books, I walk away immediately. Walk away, because to me that's just shady right off the bat.
The worst stores that I've dealt with, and there's only a handful of them that I've dealt with, and I will only go to stores that do this once, because once I walk out, I will never come back. Is the ones that don't have anything marked, and then you walk up to the register and they pull out a price.
No.
No.
First of all, I don't pay price by prices for anything.
Yeah, that's too fluid. No way.
Yeah.
Plus, I mean, not to be too cynical, but in some case, they may be assuming that that the potential buyer doesn't have the knowledge necessary to know whether or not they're being ripped off.
Yeah.
Because, call me crazy, but some comic book dealers are kind of slimy.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like any other business. You're going to
Yeah,
give
my-
people respect, and people you can't.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
in that business, there's a preponderance of people that you should be very wary of.
Yeah.
So, the Simpsons guy exists for a reason. So,
Paul, your Spider-Man collection sounds like my Justice League collection. I have from the most recent issue before they stopped making them for now, all the way back to, gosh, it's got to be like in the 50s of the original series, and everything front. And then from that point down to 1, I have some sporadic ones. I think the lowest one I have is like 14 or 13. And I'm missing, I think, like 35 issues total from number 1 to whatever that number is that I have the complete run then. And I don't have Brave and the Bold 3 issues there. I don't have those at all, but I have the DC archives. Yeah. I have the archives. So that encompasses everything that I am missing. So in that sense, I do have a complete readable run, but the issues themselves, I'm missing probably like 30, 35 issues.
Now, Justice League was never my go-to. I've always loved the Justice League. It's never my go-to as far as collecting. I was always more of a Marvel guy. But I've recently, and then I'm talking within the last 6 months, added some issues without breaking the bank on any of them. I've added issues 19, 20, 24, and 35. So,
nice.
And
That's
I
awesome.
don't think I spent more than $15 for any of them.
That's fantastic.
When I could find them like that, so I can't help myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't want to go beyond our time crunch because I know at some point you guys are going to say, enough, let me go. So we are going with the normal format, Marvel, a DC, and an indie. But as the guests, my tradition is I always let the guests pick what order we go in. You want to go first, that's fine. You want to go last, that's fine. I don't care.
Doesn't matter to me.
Any preference, Chris?
I think we should start with Elfquest because I'm excited to talk about that book.
Okay, so I'm going to give a little Elfquest history for you, or at least my Elfquest history.
Please do.
Back in the late 70s, because I am older than dirt, was when I first got my driver's license. And my mom would go to a place where her sisters were, where they worked, actually, in Bay Ridge, New York. I lived in Marine Park, New York. She would go in Bay Ridge, which is about half an hour away. On the weekends, like on a Saturday during the day, she'd go spend time with her sisters. And a lot of times, so that I could use the car, I'd drop her off, I'd have the car for the day, and then I'd pick her up at the end of the day. And those were the opportunities where I would stop by this one store in Bay Ridge where they had different things from the comic book stores that were in my neighborhood. And that's where I discovered Elfquest. And it was the only store I ever saw Elfquest in those days. And the listeners can't appreciate the video, but I have the original run. I have about 10 issues of it. And they went for $1.25 each, so they were very expensive.
Yeah.
I thought the series was just awesome back then. And it had a real, like, Lord of the Rings feel to it. And I remember being very into it. It's funny because I haven't broken these out in forever. But even in 81 or 82, I bought the Elfquest Gathering. And I really was into it. Then when Facebook started, I became friends on Facebook with Wendy and Richard Pini.
Get out.
I thought that was so cool.
Yeah.
Except that they kept posting political things. Now, I don't care if I agree with you or don't agree with you on the political stuff. I don't really want to see it on Facebook, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And somebody actually called them out on it, saying, you have to post so much political stuff. And I don't even remember. I don't remember if they were uber liberal or uber conservative. It doesn't matter. But they just kind of gave the theoretical middle finger to that person and said, if you don't like it, unfriend us. And I just took the bull by the horns, and I unfriended them. I was not the one who called them out on it, but I just thought that was so callous to just say, "Oh, I don't care. I'm posting my political stuff."
Yeah.
Anyway, so, but be that as it may, I I still am to this day very, very impressed with what they did with the series, because they just pretty much did this all on their own in the beginning. And if you look at this issue, some of it is clearly done like on an old typewriter in the text pages.
That was part of the charm of it. I loved it.
It is part of the charm. I agree. But, it takes a lot of initiative and a lot of guts to self-publish this stuff, especially at that time.
Oh, yeah. What was it, 1978, I think I read?
Yeah. So it's very, very impressive, actually. And the work, the work is beautiful. So I think the stories, I don't remember all the details of the stories. And I even though, like I said, I bought the Elfquest Gathering and I read it, but I really don't remember the details about what they gave us. And by the time it got reprinted by Marvel, and they added color to the issues and everything, there was in a stretch when I wasn't collecting it, so I didn't really get into those. But to give a brief synopsis, the story is written and drawn. Actually, in the Marvel comic, they give all the credit to Wendy Pini, but in this one they say Wendy and Richard. So I'm pretty sure it's Wendy and Richard. Anyway, we start off with a group of humans in this world who are having a ceremony where they're going to sacrifice an elf, and then we get a quick history of the elves and the humans and their basically antagonistic way to each other. And then we join our hero in current days, where they rescue the elf that's about to be sacrificed. They fight off the humans. They actually kill one of them, so it is not totally a children's story. They return to their village, but in the meanwhile, the humans are more and more outraged over the fact that one of their people died. Then we come back to the village where they're licking their own wounds, but then actually we get a lot of parts where we're just kind of meeting the different characters, and that's one part where the exposition is almost a little bit more basic, because there's pictures of the characters with their names next to them and that type of thing.
Yeah.
But then eventually, you find out that this is the elf tribe are wolf riders, so they have the wolves on their side effectively, and they can communicate with them. And then the humans come to attack them to get their revenge, and what they do is they set the elves' camp on fire. So the elves have to flee, and what they do is they go to the area where the gnomes are, and within the gnomes they're not welcome either, or by the gnomes they're not welcome. But they make their way in and they try to bargain with them. The elves are clearly our heroes in these stories. They get before the gnome king, who is not happy with them. But anyway, they finally convince him to take them through and let them out where there's an area that's sunny that isn't on fire, at the threat of his life. So he sends off his minion, who they have beaten down, to lead them. He takes them out, and then as soon as he takes them out, he causes an avalanche that won't let them back into their caves, and they're looking at the sun and not knowing where to go, and that's where the story ends. And then we get a little extra added pages, or a few extra added pages on here, where they kind of show you the evolution of how the characters were originally drawn and how they built them up. And then we get a color picture of Cutter, who's one of the main characters. And it's just a nicely put together book, and it is, according to their piece in here, it is the second printing of this particular story. That they had one that was even more rudimentary, that had come out, I guess, about a year earlier. And then they upgraded their printing process. And I think these issues, honestly, are fine. I don't know if you guys have run into them. Chris, I don't know if they ever came into your store.
Elfquest would pop up. Package would come in every once in a while, not often.
The magazine-sized ones?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Were they a hot item to sell?
No, I don't recall having any real people asking for them or any real demand for them.
That's a shame. Yeah, I just recently looked on eBay just to see, oh, do I have something here that I didn't even know had value? And it didn't look like they were going for high prices. To me, it's a forgotten treasure. I really enjoyed these issues when they were coming out, and going back into it and rereading this one was kind of fun. And I think I may try and since old age has robbed me of my memories of most of what went on in these books, it's like they're brand new for me.
Yeah.
So,
well, Paul, what I love about you selecting this is that when he was still with us, Jamie D, for one of our episodes, he was always a fan of Elfquest, and we did a review, and the book we chose was not the first issue like this. It was well into the series. Remember this, Shane?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I do.
So
I usually listen, so I'm surprised I missed that.
Yeah, this is years ago, and the rest of us just weren't that taken with it because we didn't really know what was going on.
Yeah, I think it was the beginning of a story, but a much later iteration of it.
And what was great about this was that I got to revisit the concept because as Jamie was a proponent of it, but from the beginning, and I enjoyed it far more than the whatever one we read.
Yeah, I did too.
So
and they did a great job of really introducing everybody in a kind of forgotten way that I don't think many people do these days when they introduce characters. A little bit of a primer, you get a little bit of name tag with the character, and it was just well done. It was kind of, to lack of a way to sound old, it was vintage, classic way of storytelling.
Well, for me, what was really affected me was the artwork is phenomenal.
Yeah.
I mean, right out of the gate, they're producing superb fantasy artwork. Has this been animated yet? Because it screams for that.
It does.
Wow.
Yeah, it really does.
I mean, going back to this from the late 70s, these first appearances. I mean, the stylized fantasy lines, the and I mean this in the best possible way, the cartoonish feel of it. It reminded me, I mean, obviously it's a forerunner. It reminded me of Bone in a way, that type of sensibility.
Ooh, that's an interesting contrast.
I was deeply impressed. I mean, I've seen Elfquest artwork before, obviously, covers and ads and over the years, but this is the first time except for that book we read with Jamie D years ago, that I really sat down and read an Elfquest story. And I was so impressed with just, I'm assuming they were probably in their 20s at this point, right? However long this is.
Probably. This is
1978. So, yeah.
So, early on, I mean, the stuff is clearly there. And I thoroughly enjoyed this. It's an excellent fantasy story. And I just kept thinking to myself, this hasn't been made into an animated movie yet or a series. I mean, it screams for that.
Just a quick search online says, in the early 1990s, an ad for a multi-volume animated adaptation of Elfquest appeared in the comic. A few issues later, the Peonies told readers they'd withdrawn from the deal. So it looks like it was going to happen at one point, but then didn't, and probably never has.
My guess is that in order to sell it, to get the animated version done, they probably had to relinquish quality control and possibly relinquish their rights to sequels or whatever. That maybe made it not as good a deal as it could have been for them.
Yeah,
it's a shame. I could easily see this just from the era it came out in the 70s. I could see this in the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings style.
Sure.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
When you think about how this is the time period where Dungeons and Dragons is starting to make its presence felt.
Yeah.
You mentioned Bakshi, the Hobbit, Lord of the Rings animated films. Was it Fire?
Yeah, the Lord of the Rings ones, if you remember, because I had read the books in the late 70s. I read the Lord of the Rings books. Actually, I saw the Bakshi version, then I read the books. And the Bakshi version is basically the Lord of the Ring, the Fellowship of the Ring, and half of Two Towers. And then what they did was they came up with a Rankin and Bass version of Return of the King, which picked up from where that left off. But the animation was so dramatically different, and you had Orson Bean doing Frodo's voice, and it just didn't hold up.
See, Rankin and Bass, we need our authority Murd here to.
Yep, I was thinking that. Well, and you're probably right. They probably would have had to relinquish too much to do it, because I wonder because right around that time, of course, Star Wars was hitting from 77 on, and I wonder how much that changed the landscape, because all that merchandising for Star Wars really came out in 78. From that point on, anything fantasy sci-fi, everybody tried to turn into a merchandising juggernaut, and some were successful, some weren't. But I wonder just how many studios and different things said, well, we'll do this, but we're going to need this, because nobody wanted to do what 20th Century Fox did and gave George Lucas all the rights to the merchandising, and thought, he'll never do anything with that. And meanwhile, he built an empire from it, literally.
Really. So
The other great thing about go ahead, Paul.
Go
Sorry.
Chris.
No, the other great thing I was going to say was that, as Shane mentioned, the way they introduce, because there's 17 members of the Holt, as they call it, and they introduce each one, and you get a sense of who they are. Like the narrative is very strong. I mean, it's simple, but by the end of it, you know exactly the place of each of those characters, what their basic personalities are, and what they're going to bring to the group. And the fact that they end it with them like in a desert,
Yeah.
Which they're not accustomed to at all, makes you want to continue with it. I can imagine readers back then, because I think they said they came out every 4 months.
Oh my gosh.
I think that's what they said in their introduction, something like that. It wasn't monthly. So then to wait to see what happens next, I'm sure. And then plus, how did you find the books back then too?
Well, that was what I was saying. That was the whole key to the fact that I had the one store where I knew I could find it.
Yeah, I mean,
otherwise
even
the other stores I went to didn't have it.
Yeah, even Marvel and DC. Sometimes unless you had one of the early comic shops, you were beholden to the spinner racks, and they weren't always consistent either. So
no, but I had comic shops. I had neighborhood comic shops that I went to, and it was still this one niche shop where I was able to get it. There were two stores that I regularly frequented at that time, and neither one of them had it. So when I had the excuse to drive over to Bay Ridge, I would always leave about a half an hour early, and I would go to the comic store before I would go and get my mom.
Paul, you're looking pretty good for an old guy.
That's only because you're not as far behind me as I like to think you are. So I just want to mention quickly that I do remember when Byrne took over the Fantastic Four, he aped a scene from Elfquest when he was dating Frankie Ray, and then he went to pick her up. She was going to watch her roommate who was rehearsing for a play, and the play they were putting on was Elfquest. I don't know if you guys saw that or if you made the connection.
Oh,
no, I didn't.
Right out of the.
I didn't know
that.
that.
I have to go back and look at that.
Comic.
That's great.
But they talk about, people in my tribe don't do this or whatever. It was right out of Elfquest.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I'll have to check that out.
I got to say, just quickly by way of rating, I love this book. I'm giving it A's all around. I just think it was great. So I'm going to be quick.
I thought it was great for something. Again, I never read like this, and got to sink my teeth into the very first original issue. It was a lot of fun to read and very well done. And I could see if I would have been able to pick this up back then that I possibly could have been hooked on it too.
Excellent first issue. It does everything a first issue should do.
Yeah.
And the artwork especially. I mean, the dialogue is solid, but it's the artwork that really is the star here for me, and that really tells the story and makes you want to continue with it.
Yeah, I mean, Wendy Pini is clearly a very talented artist.
Yeah.
And I assume she was not the quickest worker in the world, which is why they would do a 4-month turnaround on the books. But
yeah,
I'm surprised she hasn't found her way more into the mainstream over the years. So I guess we'll call an end to this call, and then I'll call you guys back on Skype.
Okay. Good luck to all of us.
Hopefully we don't have, good luck to all of us, that's right.
So that does it for Elfquest. Which one of you gentlemen would like to go next?
Shaney Poo, do you have a preference?
I'll go.
All right, Booster it is.
So this time, and people who are listening can't see it, I'm holding up the most recent iteration in a nice hardback volume.
That's
they
a
came
handsome
out with
volume.
2 volumes of Booster Gold's classic series. And it encompasses the entire series, all 24 issues of it. And what I chose was Booster Gold number 6, because I absolutely love the cover of that issue.
Oh yeah,
which gives this great turnaround of Booster Gold and a little bit of his background, like a file, Skeets' picture, the glove, the Legion ring, and guest starring Superman on it. And it's really early in the series. I mean, the series itself had only been out 6 months. This is July of 1986 on the cover, which would have been what, May of 86?
April or May.
April or May.
Yeah.
I did not pick this originally up off the rack. I was really just barely getting into actually collecting DC comics at that time with Justice League, because that came out right. I think their cover date for number 1 was July, and it wasn't until issue 4 that Booster Gold came out, and that was the first time I ever heard of Booster Gold. And then after reading Justice League for a little bit, I started to get interested in what this Booster Gold guy was, and I started looking into his issues, and then got all of his and Blue Beetle's issues. The synopsis for this issue is there's just a young boy on a bike going for like some summer fun, and he passes by this little miniature thing that he thinks at first is a toy, when really it's a little miniature alien, and
it's a Micronaut. Sorry.
crashed on Earth. He picks it up, and it can't communicate very well with him, but he takes it home, and eventually this little astronaut, Micronaut, shows that he's looking for Superman by showing this burst of energy in this Superman shield pattern. And this kid sees a commercial for Booster Gold on the TV and decides, hey, maybe I'll go talk to Booster and he'll know what to do, because he can help find Superman. He goes to Gold Star Towers, to the business that Booster runs, and talks his way past Trixie into see Booster, shows him the little guy, and Booster decides to help him and puts out a call to news outlets, newspapers, and challenges Superman to come meet him at such and such a date at such and such a time. And Superman's all worried about the threat, because Booster exaggerates, of course, and said there's a threat coming on Earth, so I dare you to come meet me. So, of course, Superman being Superman, he goes to meet him, and is a little bit angry at Booster for the way he portrayed all this, and Booster even kind of sheepishly admits, yeah, you kind of exaggerated, but I needed to get you here. And Booster kind of storms off, a little bit frustrated with the situation. And for whatever reason, Skeets tells Superman everything about Booster's origin, every sordid, tawdry detail, his secret identity. I can't remember, and this is really bad of me, I can't remember if in the 6 issues, if Booster's identity as Michael John Carter was out there in the world, or if he only went by Booster Gold. I'd have to go back and look at the first few issues to kind of remember that, and I didn't. But Skeets goes and tells Superman absolutely everything that's going on. And how Booster got there, which is quite criminal. And it all ends up with another little alien coming and kind of zapping Superman, Booster, and even Skeets in the end. And that's where the issue really ends. It doesn't give you a whole story about what's happening with these little Micronauts that are coming through here. I'm sure that comes out later in issue 7 and 8, because 7 you get Superman and Booster battling it out, and the corresponding issue in a Superman title is Booster Gold beating up Superman. Same cover, just reverse what's happening. But I always love this issue because it's a secret origin issue, even though Booster, God love him, doesn't do it the right way and is kind of criminalistic in his intent, whether his heart's in the right place or not. And Superman's quite a bit disappointed in a thief becoming a superhero and wanting to be rich as a result of it. But I always loved this series. I mean, everybody who listens to me regularly knows how much I love Booster Gold, and yeah, this series was just fun, and issue 6 was always one of my favorites, and a lot of it had to do with that cover and the secret origin story in the middle of it.
Shane, what was a delight for me was to revisit a comic from the 80s, and this is very much an 80s comic.
Oh, yeah.
In that you have, and I don't mean this as a negative, you have a significant amount of dialogue and captions to read. You just got your money's worth out of, I mean, it was 60 cents or 75 cents, whatever it was then, but you got your money's worth, and
even had some thought balloons.
Thought balloons, yes, but
Love
what I
thought
especially,
balloons.
yeah, and what I especially love, thought balloons are a really missed narrative device. God, Spider-Man wouldn't be Spider-Man without thought balloons. Come on.
Mm-hmm.
But
well, I think the Marvel Age of Comics wouldn't be without thought balloons.
Well said.
Agreed.
Sir. Well said.
Agreed.
What I love, though, right from the get-go, is that they establish Skeets as the conscience of Booster Gold.
Yeah.
And early on, like, their comedic repartee is there. And that, to me, that's what's so much enjoyable. I mean, I don't know Booster Gold nearly as well as you do, Shane, but I've always loved the Skeets Booster dynamic.
Absolutely.
Great to see that on display. The other thing that I really enjoyed was somehow he used a vintage credit card from the museum as currency when he got back in time. I guess the account was still open. I don't know what happened there, but
that may be stretching reality a little bit.
You forget that he grabbed the time machine and came back in time.
I also don't know Booster Gold nearly as well as you. I kind of enjoy it. I've had a theme lately where I come up with these characters who I think highly of. I consider myself a fan of the character, but I don't really know them that well. Mm-hmm. And I would put him in that category. I know him. I got to know him better in the Justice League Unlimited cartoon than anywhere else.
Sure.
But what I got to thinking of is this era when this came out in the mid to late 80s. There was a quarterback on the Baltimore Colts, and that's back when they were the Baltimore Colts.
Yep.
Yeah.
His name was Art Schlichter. And there was a whole big controversy because from the time that he got drafted for the NFL, he was a heavy, heavy gambler. And before he even got his first paycheck, he had gambled away his signing bonus and was hugely in debt. And there was a whole big controversy. He ended up doing time in jail. I mean, it was serious stuff. But I gotta wonder, since that was in the mid 80s, if somehow that influenced this.
Sure.
When this came out, that they said, well, what if in the future somebody had this and he did this? Yeah. I have no idea if.
Or they were thinking about Pete Rose.
Yeah, that could have been too.
But no, I don't think the Pete Rose controversy
hadn't hit yet. Okay.
I'm trying to think of when that happened. This book was 87, Shane.
86.
86. I think Pete Rose may not have even retired yet. I'm not sure. I think he might have been the player/manager on the Reds.
I remember he was at the end. Yeah, I'm not really a sports guy, so I don't know the years, but
I'm a big baseball fan, and my Mets have just let me down hugely this year. But that's besides the point. That's a different podcast for different people.
That's okay for us Philly fans.
Well, I don't think your team is doing what you want either, but they're doing better than mine. So I'll bow before your Philadelphia fanhood.
Oh, you don't have to do that. Oh gosh, sometimes they're pretty bad.
Hey, they made it to the World Series last year. It's not so bad. Anyway, but yeah, I think you may even be right, Chris, because this may have been when the Pete Rose controversy was first broiling, before it really even hit its peak. After he left the Phillies. But I wonder. But I just find that the whole thought fascinating that somebody would turn that around and become a hero, and that just to make that character the hero of his own book is kind of the start of almost like a non-edgy anti-hero.
Well, that was captured by the really fun interplay he was having with Superman. Like Superman's really the blue Boy Scout in this issue. Like he's, how dare you take on the mantle of a hero? You're trying to make a buck out of it. And it was just great to see the two of them going back and forth because they're coming from very different perspectives, obviously.
And early on in the issue, Booster's like all excited to meet Superman.
Oh yeah,
really is thinking what an honor it is.
Well, all those years he was the Night Watchman. I mean, he soaked up all this knowledge.
Yeah,
and he obviously was in awe of this time period.
Yep.
So good origin, Shane.
It is. I've always liked Dan Jurgens' art.
Oh yeah.
So this almost to me, it's almost going to feel like damning him with vain praise because it's to me it's typical Dan Jurgens, which means it's really good.
Yeah.
And one of the things I like about it is it's so easy to distinguish to me the style when he's doing Booster as compared to when he does Superman. Mm-hmm. Superman is just drawn differently. He's more imposing. He's darker. He's more threatening in his own way. And Superman, he's giving the Boy Scout dialogue and yet looking very displeased. It's almost the the paternal displeasure that you're getting out of him.
Yeah.
Well, there's that
And
great
I think
panel.
He's
I'm sorry.
capturing that. Go ahead, Chris. Which one?
That one there?
Shane brought me to the
Yeah.
point of Superman. Booster first sees Superman standing above him in almost like a godlike posture, and his Booster's looking up at him.
Yeah, well,
Great shot.
anybody who grew up, and I know there are people who are exceptions, but anybody who grew up totally respecting their dad and displeased him at one time or another knows that panel from the Booster perspective.
Oh yes. All my dad had to do was look out his glasses at the top, and you knew you did something wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And that's it. When you hit the nail on the head. When I was talking about the paternal displeasure, that's the page I was thinking of.
Yep.
So it's just, I think it's really well captured in here. I like the fact that he has Skeets kind of on the side of each panel or the side of each page during the origin, which I usually don't like negative space used in a story, but it's kind of well done in here. So it's just, and it's a totally different type of origin. It's not something, it's not okay. He was bitten by a radioactive museum artifact.
Yeah, he didn't pick up something and it became his totem or anything like that.
And what I also liked was, it's not as probably edgy as it would be now, but they established that he destroyed his life. Like his family threw him out, because he was involved in shady activity, and they show you, at least to a degree, the cost of that. And how he ruined himself and his mother and his sister. Yeah. So Shane, I assume they go into that more in other stories down the road.
They do, and they end up, not to spoil too much for anybody else, but they do retcon that a little bit down the road to be, if I'm not mistaken, that he's betting on these games to help his father in some way. So he's trying to make money for that and take care of his mom too. He does have some adventures with his sister. She ends up coming back. It's short-lived, but she's around for a little bit. They really take, and I mean, think about this. This is the mid '80s, so this is the decade of greed and Wall Street and and all that. So having a self-centered, egotistical superhero who's out to make a buck, even though he's in some ways and really later years really does do it for the right intentions. At this time, it's really his greed while still trying to be a hero. That's very conflicting and hard to get past at times, because he really comes across as a real ass.
But that's always what I think compelling about the character, is that you have mixed feelings about him, because ultimately he usually ends up doing the right thing.
Oh yeah. His
reasons for often doing the right thing that aren't necessarily the most noble or heroic. They're often very human or very sordid. That's also, plus you always have Skeets there going like, okay, well, wait a minute, why are we doing this? Like,
Jiminy Cricket.
Yeah. And I know later as Booster's story pans out into Justice League and he befriends Ted Ford as Blue Beetle and they go on adventures, Ted's just another voice of reason for him to bounce off of, and they really do. I love this series is only 24 issues, but then there's the second series that comes out after or before Infinite Crisis. Boy, I can't remember. I think it's after. And it's really Booster being a hero without anybody ever knowing it, because he can't let them know it. And if they know it, that's going to screw up all kinds of stuff in time.
Oh, that's the one.
That wasn't New 52, was it?
No, it was before that.
Okay.
I do remember reading it. I think.
Yeah, it was in the 2000s.
I read that series. It was thoroughly entertaining. I really enjoyed it.
What they did was they gave him the origin of a supervillain.
Yeah.
His
really is
power set and everything is created through avarice. It's not created for noble means. And he has basically a supervillain origin, and then they somehow turn that around to make him into a hero, which it's atypical. It's just not something that was done. And I think it's exceedingly clever.
I really think throughout all of Booster Gold's history, I think Batman's one of the few that actually knows his true purpose as they progress his stories in the 2000s, and of course Skeets, and maybe a choice few others, but it's not many. Most people think he's just an arrogant dipstick who really is just trying to make a buck out of everything he does. But I always love the character, and I love that they bring in Skeets to be the Jiminy Cricket, and later in other stories, Blue Beetle helps out with that too. And it's just it's just always been a character that I've enjoyed from the first time I read him in Justice League #4 through today.
And you top it off with the fact that they sandwiched this origin in and gave us just enough story that you want to read the next one.
Yeah.
Not for more origin, but for where does this story go?
Yeah.
Very, very well done. Now,
it's captivating and fun, and vintage 80s, as Chris said too. It's absolute true 80s through and through.
For people listening in, I'm going to pull back the curtain for a second. Shane was on the fence between this and a different Booster Gold issue. And I'm not going to say which one that was, because I think if we can find another time to record, I'm going to ask you to bring that one, because I think that one would go good as a bookend with this one.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds great.
So Shane came up with the choice of two, and Chris picked which one we were doing.
Yeah.
And good choice, both of you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to go again and say, for me, A's down the line on this one. It's just an excellent book.
Yeah. This is another one that I have an original issue. I have a trade paperback. I have this hardback. This is another one I've got like 1,000 different versions of the same few issues.
And what's so strong about the origin is that, and Shane gave an example just before, is that there's so much room to work with that and to further develop that character and the world he came from. Sometimes some of these origins, they can be they don't hold up over time, or time, as Murd might say. But I think this is a strong origin, because like you guys said, the fact that he's a very, in some ways, a more sordid character, and obviously when you ever have an anti-hero type figure, that's always such a great narrative device. So, are we all rating, Paul, or did you just do that? I forgot.
No, it's up to everybody to rate as much as you want.
All A's. It's.
Oh yeah, all A's for me too.
And I love those '80s colors.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
As well.
Well, and this I got to tell
you, I could easily see this character drawn by Steve Ditko.
Oh, sure.
Just see it in kind of the the 60s Charlton line.
Yeah,
right next to Blue Beetle, where he could have been.
Paul. Good call.
This hardback version is beautiful. It was a little pricey, but of course I ordered it from DCBS, so it was $20. It smells great. It's made of great paper. It looks great. It feels great. It's not that newer shiny stuff. It's just a fabulous trade dress.
And that's the two volume.
It's 2 volumes. It encompasses the whole series. The dust jacket comes off to reveal kind of the same picture, but a little bit more fanfare and glip behind it. And
I love the back copy. He's in it for the bucks.
Yeah, he's in it for the bucks.
Gordon Gecko of superheroes.
Yeah,
well, it's the era. That's the same era that this was happening in.
Yep.
It was the Reagan years. Gordon Gecko.
God, I love the 80s. And not because I was greedy. I just love the 80s. I listen to 80s music yet. God, if I had some of the clothes, I'd still wear them.
Now, Shane, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. I mean,
no, I love the 80s.
Yeah, I'm a little older than you, so I'm more into the 70s and the 70s music. But I ain't wearing none of those 70s clothes. So, all right, so let's keep moving along. And Chris, I got to tell you, if I had to bet, I would have bet significant money that in light of the recent news that we've had, that you were going to pick a book drawn by John Romita Sr.
Oh.
I was a little surprised by your choice. I'm not complaining about your choice at all, but I'm a little surprised because I just thought that's where you'd go.
That's a good point.
But every time you've been on here, I think you've surprised me a little bit with what you've chosen, and it's never let me down.
Oh,
and I'm going to start off by putting this in front of you.
Oh.
My Mike Plug Modern Masters volume from Tomorrows, and maybe that's the first clue of what you picked.
Yeah.
Well, let me hold up on the screen. Unfortunately, the listeners can't see this. One of the reasons why I picked this book, because it has a special place in my heart.
I was going to ask. I was very
Here's the original.
curious.
Here's the original. There we go. And
Ah,
there's the
I
power
cannot
record. There's the
have-
power
That
record.
makes sense. Okay.
Yep.
I did not have that power record.
No, I did not have that power record. I couldn't figure out. I'm like, I was reading, I'm like, what? Nothing. It's not a bad story by any means, but I'm like, there's nothing really special happening. Like, it's not a surprise at the end or anything. I'm like, why did Chris pick this book of all the books he could have picked?
Well, for those listening at home, we're talking about Man-Thing issue 5, volume 1. Very much the Bronze Age, ladies and gentlemen, 1974. And Shane, I picked this for a couple of reasons. One was the nostalgic affection I have for the power records of my youth, which apparently were produced, because I looked at the record copyright in Newark, New Jersey.
Oh, wow.
Which makes sense considering some of the accents you got on some of these recordings. It's a man wolf! Anyway, and number 2, I'm such a lover of the Bronze Age Marvel horror titles, and this story in particular, I think one of the main reasons I chose it, because you're right, not a ton happens in the issue, but it's Steve Gerber writing, Mike Plug penciling, and the narrative tone in the book is very in keeping with, I think, was the progression of Marvel in the 70s, where you had stories that were even more personal in their tone, in the dialogue, in the caption boxes. And as both as a younger reader and now, it still strikes me how human this type of story is. And the way Gerber captures, really in just brief strokes, even maybe just a caption box, a particular character, a particular situation. Stanley got the ball rolling with this type of storytelling, but people like Gerber, Jerry Conway, Steve Englehart, Jim Starlin, they took it to the next level. And I think
I'm going to say that Steve Englehart and Jerry Conway and Len Wein and other guys like that, Roy Thomas even, kind of took what Stan did and continued it and fleshed it out a little bit. Steve Gerber was a unique animal, though. He did not march to the beat of any other drummer.
No, he did not.
He was. I love his stuff, and I do have the fond memory of meeting him at a Comic-Con in the 70s at one point. And
wow,
even though I was a punk teenager and he was probably in his 20s, he spent time. He talked to me and my friends, and was very, very cool. So I have a warm spot for every one of the writers I just mentioned, but I definitely have a personal nostalgia when you mention Steve Gerber.
Well, I mean, Gerber, when you think, of course, Howard the Duck.
Sure.
I mean, this story, I think, and I don't mean this as a put down, is kind of tame in many ways compared to some other Gerber work. I mean, but the other reason I chose it is that Mike Plug is one of the great artists of the 1970s in comics, and he was an apprentice to Will Eisner, and you could tell that in his penciling style. Or he worked in Eisner's studio. I don't remember the exact capacity, but he worked with Eisner for a period of time, and the way Plug draws, horror creatures, monsters, the swamp. There's just a sensibility to it that as a kid struck me so profoundly. His work on Ghost Rider, Werewolf by Night, Frankenstein's Monster. I mean, he did all these titles. He co-created Ghost Rider, the modern Ghost Rider. And then, of course, I first experienced him on this Man-Thing story, initially in the Power record, and then eventually I found the comic version. But what strikes me is the book is beautifully rendered. The art is breathtaking, and he brings a human quality to this shambling muck monster that is not human at all, and that's always struck me. Do you want me to do a plot synopsis first?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, as brief or as rambling as you would like.
I'll try to be as coherent as I can. So. Basically, the story starts with a very powerful and stunning opening page, where the Man-Thing, he emerges from the swamp, and it's a very Eisner-esque title page where they incorporate the title into the art. It's stunning. And you then, and this is another reason why I wanted to pick this book. And they actually included this in the Power record. It's so 70s in that they show a character committing suicide in the comic, and then they made a record for kids, and they kept that scene in the Power record. The 70s, man, just incredible. So,
this is with the Comics Code Authority.
Yes, and the Comics Code Authority. It's on the cover. You're right, Paul. Remember, they had liberalized the code at this point, which is why they actually could have horror comics at Marvel. But yes, we won't get into the whole giant-sized man thing. Crack. It's just there. It's obvious. So, so in the story, this random circus clown drives, to the perimeter of the swamp, sits down right off the road, and shoots himself. And what's always gripping about Gerber's Man-Thing run is that, and again, we don't see this anymore, it's a style of writing that's basically gone in comics, is that it's very heavy on captions. And because the Man-Thing can't actually verbalize and communicate, everything's is in the mind of the Man-Thing, such as it is. And to me, that's what makes the story so entrancing, because it's the Man-Thing trying to balance the fact that he once was a man, Ted Sallis. He has some scraps of memory of when he was a human being, and then trying to accommodate that to what the experience he's having now. And again, the book does a nice job of in a 2-page spread to give you a quick sort of the memories of Ted Sallis as the scientist, the soldier, etc. The Man-Thing, somewhere deep in the recesses of his mind, realizes, I must bury this being who's dead. And then we go to the Richard Rory character, who is, as Merv would say, is like the Rick Jones of the Man-Thing universe. And again, the 70s clothes here are amazing. The headbands, the huge belt buckles. I'm just loving every second of it. And he and his companion Ruth Hart are on the road. And again, this story's the middle of the thing. So you realize that they had encountered the Man-Thing before. This is in Florida, of course. And I love how Gerber brings a little bit of the culture war into this story, how the crotchety ancient motel owner will not let him and Ruth sleep in the same room together. And they have to pick separate beds. Did you guys catch that?
Yeah. I wondered. I'm like, that's weird, but it makes sense for the time.
Yeah, and she says, well, that was a hassle, wasn't it, Joe College? And he says, I hate people who make education sound like a dirty word. I bet he's a reform school reject. God, Gerber was so good. Like, just, I mean, he just captures the scene and captures characters so well. His quick, broad strokes. Then we get into the circuses in town, and there's a circus performer, a woman is being beaten up by the owner. Richard intervenes. Then you have the strong man with the great name Trag, Tragg. And then they run off with the girl just to protect her. And then they see the clown, apparently alive, by the side of the swamp, posing in a supernatural spotlight that appears from nowhere. Trag and the head of the circus are hunting the trapeze artist who's fled the tightrope artist. The clown, or is it a ghost or what have you, causes their truck to crash. Trag survives. He falls into the swamp. Meanwhile, the Richard, Ruth, and the other girl are looking for the clown. They see the Man-Thing carrying the clown. They think the Man-Thing has killed the clown. Richard, sort of shouts at him. The Man-Thing shambles off. Then they realize that he's been shot, and then Trag shows up to fight him, to attack them. The Man-Thing reappears. Now, because Trag isn't afraid, he doesn't burn at the Man-Thing's touch, which is his supernatural power, which they note in the captions. And the Man-Thing is just wiping the swamp with Trag, and then he starts to drown him, but then he relents. The last vestiges of humanity reminds him not to kill. And then this is a two-parter. So at the very end, the spirit of the clown manifests itself. It's great Plug artwork, very creepy, and rises up from the body, and then boom, end issue. And then I can tell you in issue 6 they continue with the story. So I chose this for all the reasons I mentioned. This to me is just vintage, early 70s Marvel at its best in terms of very personal story, magnificent artwork, great narrative voice. You got your money's worth for 25 cents back then, folks. So,
yeah, it's. As I said, I always respect Gerber's stories, which are just far out. They are always just a little on edge and clearly a little influenced by whatever it is he was imbibing at the time. But the thing about this issue that really makes it stand out to me as a top issue is the Plug art. I've always loved the Plug art. Plug to me, I mean, I know you mentioned that he worked in Will Eisner's studio, but it feels to me like he should have worked with Bernie Wrightson.
Bernie Wrightson.
Bernie.
But to me, it feels like it's a brother from another mother with Bernie Wrightson as far as the artwork style that he did, because he was made for horror, just like Wrightson was. And I remember in this era, this is around the era when I first started buying comics as a collector. There's this, on the bullpen page where they list the issues that came out that month. I remember that month well. This is like the infancy of my being a collector, and I just it all stands out to me. And I remember when I was in grade school around this time, I wrote a book report about comics, and I made the distinction between the Golden Age, and the Bronze Age, and now the current age, which was still actually the Bronze Age anyway. And the Silver Age and all of that, and I had to put a cover on it. So I drew a picture of the Man-Thing, because the Man-Thing is kind of an amorphous being, and it was easy for somebody who doesn't have much in the way of training to draw. But when you look at this book and you look at the way that Plug rendered him, there isn't just wild pencil lines going all over the place. All of the lines have a purpose. And much like the panel of Superman that we discussed in the last issue, in this one on page that's numbered as 23, in the bottom right corner, there's a shot of the Man-Thing engulfed in shadows, and usually the shadows make it easier because you don't have to put much detail into it. But it's so creepy looking that I just think it's gorgeous.
Good pick.
And every shot. I'm sorry.
Good pick. Panel. Yep.
Every shot, though, that he has of the Man-Thing, that like I said, there's purpose in every line. It's not just muck the way that I drew it as a, whatever I was, 10, 11-year-old at this time, because it was easy to draw that. This is an easy character in the hands of a master is what it comes down to. And he shows you the difference between what a master would do with this character and what a regular run-of-the-mill artist might do. The interesting thing is I don't love Plug on regular people as much. I love him on the monsters. I love him on the creepy. I love him on, all of that. But when it comes down to like a regular scene, like if he has to do a scene in like an office building, I don't think I would love it at all. I think you need the horror for him. And I wonder, I'm sure there is an example of it. I'm sure there's a Ghost Rider issue with guest stars or something along those lines, or a Werewolf by Night issue with guest stars where he drew regular superheroes. But I'm curious to see what that would look like right now, because I can't picture it offhand.
It's funny you mention that, Paul. I can't think of – I'm sure it's out there, but there's no images coming to my head of Plug drawing, the sort of, let's call them the main Marvel heroes. He was on all the monster books, and thankfully, because they're amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you're right.
I'm just paging through my Plug Tomorrow's book, and I see, he did some Planet of the Apes.
That's right. Oh well, those
he was well suited for that as well.
That's the black and white magazines he did with Doug Monk. Those are phenomenal.
Oh, they'd be great. Yeah. I can't imagine they wouldn't be beautiful.
Yep.
I'm not much of a horror comic fan. I would have never on my own picked this up in a million years, let alone when I was younger. But I got to say the artwork is just outstanding. I would not initially have thought about Will Eisner, but as soon as you said it, there's the page early on in the story where you have a real close-up on the clown's face just before he pulls the trigger. And I can see it right in there, the Will Eisner side of it.
Good call, Shane.
It's just fantastic. Just page after page, just beautiful. And I agree. Sometimes his human facial features aren't the best, but every other piece of art around it, and including Man-Thing himself, just makes up for it in spades.
And that's not to say that the human characters look bad.
No,
they just don't stand out the way the other characters do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think out of all the human characters, the clown, of course, is great, but the clown himself is a little bit abstract in the way he is, just for being, especially one that's suicidal. So it's it was a fun story to read. I knew almost nothing about it. The closest I ever came to reading anything about Man-Thing was watching that Halloween special on Disney.
I was going to bring that up. Yep,
a few months ago, which was fantastic.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, this was a treat for the eyes and everything. But boy, oh boy, just beautiful artwork.
I'm glad you fellas enjoyed it.
You have yet to let me down on the choices you've made from Prez to Black Panther to. I'm trying to think of what other ones you've brought over the years, but you've always picked a winner. So I would have been surprised if you didn't. What's the strong guy's name? Trag.
Yep.
He's another one because he's drawn almost as a horror character.
Yes.
Sure. Yeah.
So he's also very well rendered. Giving him his own kind of circus of crime to draw makes it easier to fit in with the Plug style as well. Because it's not, they're not your run of the mill. Again, it's not an office scene. It's, it's strange characters and a strange background, which, is fitting.
Well, the page on page 17, when the pickup truck crashes, look at the second panel where the two men in the cab of the truck, their faces are illuminated by the light. It's gripping artwork. There's a supernatural sheen to almost everything that's going on in this story. It's man.
And when I look at the artwork in these stories, a lot of times what I try to do is I try to go back to the beginning again and avoid reading any dialogue or captions and just look at the artwork and bring myself through the story with the artwork, because that's how I judge the storytelling. It's as I'm doing that, is the story progressing based purely on the artwork, and am I seeing where it's going and understanding it? Now, that's not to say dialogue and captions aren't necessary in a book, because I do think they add a lot to it. Don't get me wrong, but I think storytelling is in many cases with many modern artists, it's a little bit of a lost art. Mm-hmm. I think some artists have gotten too into the I'm going to draw a poster image. And I'm going to draw a lot of splash pages, and they really aren't bringing stories along with their artwork. They're letting the dialogue do that for them, and that's a little lazy as far as I'm concerned. And it definitely does not fit with the Marvel method. I think that's one of the areas where, people blast Stan for like, oh, you took credit, but you had the artists do this. Stan created a method where he forced these artists to put together stories that had storytelling in the artwork.
Yep. I mean, yeah, we can separate that from the creator controversy, which is a whole other issue. But from an artistic standpoint, the method itself, I mean, brought out, I would argue, the best of these artists. I mean, because they were compelled to plot as well as draw, and they were all master storytellers. And I don't know if Gerber used the Marvel method or not. I can't answer that, but like you said, Paul, like, Plug knows how to tell a story. Like the opening page is amazing. The introduction of the Man-Thing in the issue, and in the Power Record, because the Power Record was my first experience with the character. They use that exact same page. I mean, they in the Power Records, as I'm sure you guys know, they would take out some of the more sophisticated caption and dialogue and then substitute more simplified stuff. But the essence of the story, including the clown shooting himself, is still there. So
one of my favorites is towards the end when the clown, when his ghost comes out and he starts to ascend. Those are all very well rendered and striking images as well.
And he has a skeletal visage. His face is more like a skeleton.
Yeah.
But he's posed almost like P.T. Barnum.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. He's addressing his audience. So I think it's very, very cool.
Just a fascinating issue.
It's amazing that they chose this as a Power Records. Yeah. Now, I had in that era, I had the Power Records issues for Spider-Man, Captain America, the Fantastic Four, and the Hulk. Those are the ones that I had. So they were all the mainstream heroes. I didn't have any of these. I'm sorry?
I don't think I had many, maybe one or two.
The beauty is now you can listen to them anytime you want on YouTube because everybody has posted them on there with images.
That's great because awesome. I had most of them, Paul, all the ones you mentioned, but I was lucky enough to have most of the horror ones too, which like they did Manson, they did Tomb of Dracula, they did Werewolf by Night. I think they did Frankenstein too, if I remember correctly. I think they did.
And were they multi-actor or was it one guy reading and changing?
No, they were multi-actor, but they had the same actors in every book.
Okay, all right, that makes sense.
I think like in the Spider-Man one, the one who does Peter Parker's voice is the one who does Rick Jones's voice in the Hulk issue.
That makes sense. Well, they probably recorded them all in an afternoon, Paul, so come on.
Probably.
And I'm looking at my, so 45 RPM.
Nice.
Tower Records, Newark, New Jersey. Copyright 1974. So
awesome.
Yeah, I was 2.
I was 1.
Yeah.
I was of age to be listening to it. Well, I was born in 62, so.
Okay. Oh, so you're a whole 10 years older than me. That's not bad.
Does it make you feel young?
Yeah, no.
That's why I'm here.
My body tells me no.
Well, somewhere up in my brain, I'm still about 14 years old, but physically, I'm falling apart.
That's me too. I'm definitely still stuck in my teenage years for a lot of things, and I'd probably do myself well to just turn off every electronic device and TV in the world and just go back to reading comics all the time, like I did when I was a kid.
Shane, you can balance the exuberance of youth with the wisdom of age. So,
yeah, I get lazy and tired. Just turn on the TV. I shouldn't.
Well, there's you know what? There's so much good stuff to be had on the TV.
There is
too, though.
There is, and a lot of it's superhero related.
Yeah.
And the danger of that. Let's go ahead, Paul. I'm sorry.
I was going to say it's really just a battle to balance all your aspects of your life, the different things you want, things you need to do for your spouse and your children and any other family that you have and your friends and your job. That's what life has taught me is maturity means finding a way to balance all of that stuff.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more because what I found, especially like you guys said, there's so much to choose now on television, the streaming platforms. I start to feel like, all right, I'm watching too much stuff. There's other things I should be doing with my time.
Mm-hmm.
So then you have to, like you said, you have to be mature and select. All right, what shows am I going to watch? What am I just going to you know what? I'm just going to let that one go because it's another hour. I could be doing something else. So
yeah.
So, but it's nice to have these choices.
Yes, and it's nice to be able to have friends that I can invite onto the show and just have a good time for an hour and a half, 2 hours, just shooting the breeze about stuff that we all love. So I'm going to take this opportunity to once again thank you guys for coming on and tell you I couldn't enjoy it more than I do.
Paul, it was our pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having us. I really enjoyed it.
So if anybody's listening and doesn't know where you could find these guys, I think if you look up Comic Geek Speak, you'll be able to find them. So
we're there.
Indeed.
But thanks again, guys, and thank you everybody who tuned in to listen, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to our show, and we hope you'll continue to join us each and every week for more good old-fashioned comic book back issue awesomeness. You can contact Back to the Bins to leave feedback, comments, questions, suggestions, and criticisms via email at bins@twotruefreaks.com or by joining the Back to the Bins group on Facebook. Back to the Bins is a proud affiliate of the Two True Freaks Internet Radio Network, which you may find at www.twotruefreaks.com. Two True Freaks is a registered trademark of DiManzo Corps of Milan, Italy. All rights reserved. Please take a moment to stop by the twotruefreaks.com site and check out their many other fine podcasts, won't you? Thanks, and we'll see you next week.